you, Imagination, for hosting the, this panel, and for Canada Media Fund for supporting us, and our friends at LowBirth for coming and telling us the story of their company and also the game that they're building. So the way we're going to do this conversation is kind of like two-part. One, we want to get to know our panelists, and then we'll talk a little bit about, what it means to, queer the gaming industry and how are they thinking to do it, and we'll talk a little bit about QueerTech perspective also. So I'm going to pass it to my co-moderator, to Andy, to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you again, everyone who's here, and to Imagination for having us, and CMF. My name is Andy Saldana. I'm the co-founder and COO of QueerTech. I am super excited to be here, and I'm new to Montreal.
Awesome. So we're going to start with Olivier. And so, Olivier, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did your story begin? How did you get into the gaming?
So, LowBirth is a video game studio that I co-founded almost 4 years ago now with two of my cousins, Raphael and Chloe. And yeah, we want to tell stories about atypical characters. That's kind of one of our missions. So personally, well, I started actually in the cinema. So I'm really a film buff, and I studied cinema. And but throughout my childhood and adolescence, with Raphael and Chloe, we would do creative projects together. We would make movies, write novels. We would create like role-playing games for like younger cousins, for like during Christmas parties, those kind of things. So. So after I graduated from Concordia in film production, I think I and all the three of us were in the same place, more or less. We all weren't too sure what we were going to do after our studies, or we had just finished our studies and didn't really like what we were doing. So we it was a great timing of like we all ended up wanting to create something together, and Chloe, our CEO, was really the catalyst of that, because she's the only one who actually studied in video games of the three co-founders. So she brought us together in that new medium that really know Raphael and I. So that's how it started.
That's fantastic. I'm really excited because I think really as a queer community, having more and more people getting into the industry and telling our stories through gaming is so important. And so it's really exciting when I learned about your game and the studio and having you here. So fantastic. Catherine, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into gaming?
Hi, my name is Catherine. My pronouns are she, her. And well, I've been looking for a very long time for what I was going to do in life. And after long studies in cinema, art, and other fields, I finally came upon video game. I'm a 3D animator. I'm actually the lead 3D animator at LowBirth Games. I also do technical animation.
Sai, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into the gaming industry?
Sure. So I've been working at LowBirth Games now for a little bit over a year. But it was always my goal to kind of get into the gaming industry one way or another. I've always loved video games ever since I was, as long as I can remember, pretty much. But the way that I got in was maybe a little bit unconventional. I studied English literature. I got my bachelor's majoring in English literature and minoring in religious studies, which so far hasn't come up in my game industry career, but you never know. And then I went on to get my master's in English literature as well, but with a focus on game studies, on looking at video game narratives, that kind of thing. I was really lucky to have a lot of professors at Concordia University who were really into taking games seriously as like an academic subject and as cultural artifacts, and I was just really encouraged to continue that line of research and really pursue that interest. And so through that, I eventually got a job at LowBirth as their marketing coordinator, and then I slowly kind of infiltrated the writing team as well, since there was a little bit of, I was very lucky that it was there was some work to be done on the writing team as well, and then that kind of left an opening for me to sneak my way in, and so I've been writing for the game as well.
Just if I may say, I think it makes sense. Like the two are more related, I think, than people realize, and I think one helps you do the other. So.
Yeah, that's really great. I love that intersection of storytelling, right? It's all storytelling.
It's all storytelling. Exactly.
Your personal brand, your marketing team, your game creation, it's all about storytelling. So that I love how you talked about that intersection.
Anyone, whatever you study, whatever you've done, there is probably a job for you in tech, and it's just the way how you repackage that. So it's really great to see that. I love asking these questions for always our speakers, and it's talk about your pivotal queer moment and whatever that there is. So I'm going to start with you, Catherine. Tell us, what is that queer pivotal moment?
I chose this moment because it's a story I tell often, and I'm pretty sure all of you already heard it. When I was very young, I was about 13 years old. I was very obviously queer, but I didn't realize it. And my mom one day came and she asked me, Catherine, do you like girls? And of course I said, no. And I went to my room and I was like, oh shit, I am queer.
An important moment for me was actually during my studies at Concordia University. During my second year, we had to prepare a film project, but in order to get to direct it, we had to pitch it to a jury, and only half the projects would be selected. And Chloe could probably tell you more about this, but they say it's very important when you pitch to come in with a strong hook to hook people in. And the film I wanted to direct was about homophobia in high school and in sports, especially hockey. And the film was titled Tapette, so faggot in English. So I had decided that my hook was going to be to come in the room with the jury and write Tapette on the board and talk about like the impact that words can have. But then I had to actually do it, and I'm a fairly shy person, so it was terrifying, probably almost as terrifying as actually coming out. But I did it, and the film was selected by the jury. I got to direct it. It went to many festivals, and I'm just really glad that I did it and that it happened. And I'm not sure if I would be here today if not for that, because I think it boosted my self-confidence a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
all day.
Thank you, perfect. Yeah, I struggled with thinking about this, and I really kind of narrowed it down to maybe 2 moments probably. I guess one of the main things was, coming from a very straight, very bad, if I can say that, high school, and going from that to kind of coming to the city for SciShep and going to Dawson and studying liberal arts and very queer program. I think it was such a shift going from like a predominantly straight community to one that was like, you can find a straight person at all. I think just being in a community with like mainly queer people was really, it was really invigorating. It really like gave, I think, all of us, we came to the support to be our authentic selves, I think.
Sai, I want to talk about your research, because that was really interesting to kind of, you looked at, doing video game narrative and think a little bit. So tell us a little bit about the research that you have done and some of the findings that you came.
Sure, yeah. So I looked at a lot of different games over my time at university, and I was really interested in kind of subversive modes of play, and so kind of, again, this is very like English lit-y, but troubling the author function, which I think like video games are really great about doing, because the story of a video game can't really unfold unless you have somebody in front of the video game playing it, and so I really I'm into the idea of like the fact that the player is a co-author of the text in some ways, like the way that you play the game is actually, you're creating story in tandem with the systems and with the people who made the game before it launched. I wrote my master's thesis on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I was like frantically reading through it last night to remember what I wrote, because it's been a minute. But I essentially wanted to kind of highlight how the concept of the wilds of wilderness, when we recreate it in video game form, it's with a very colonialist edge. We're really interested in kind of abstracting it, in creating a very like palatable, ready for consumption version of the wilds, which I think is interesting. I think there's a lot in games these days, especially open world games, that are about kind of processes of extraction, of collecting, of essentially ravaging the land. You are essentially playing this fantasy of someone coming into what's essentially a foreign land at this point, and trying to master it, trying to make it traversable, trying to make it familiar, trying to foreignize it in a way. You know, the way that you're in Breath of the Wild, you're activating towers and shrines, you're essentially creating all these different pathways in order to increase your mobility, in order to make the world more your own. You know, a lot of it is these power fantasies of building up your own power in areas like this. You know, these open world games with these like very inflated sense of inventories are all about, you know, collecting as much as you can and just like running down a hill, grabbing berries and sticks and rocks and then throwing them into a pot and making a sword or something like that. And, you know, it really encourages just, yeah, these really thoughtless processes of extraction, which I think really does harken back to a colonialist mindset, unfortunately. And at the same time, you know, I mean, extracting body parts from animals through hunting, through the violence that you enact on them in video games is also completely abstracted. I mean, you're not getting into the process of butchering an animal and, you know, discarding the parts that are undesirable. You just, you know, shoot an animal with an arrow and there's a puff of smoke and then you have like a perfectly cut piece of meat that you can then go and consume. And it's just like, it's the way that we recreate wilderness in video games is so much about omission, so much about, yeah, again, just like picking and choosing what we think is palatable. And then, yeah, you get into like The Legend of Zelda in particular, and it's very enmeshed in this like nostalgia and affection for like white imperialism, where the whole point of almost every game is basically trying to intervene with the disruption, who's often in the form of, you know, Ganondorf, and there's like this desire to rebuild the kingdom, this desire to, you know, reinstate this like white heterosexual imperialism and
shy away from open world because of that. Like, it's just too much for me. I often am like, oh my gosh, it's stressful playing some of these games, and
absolutely,
it gets a little intense. Too much for me anyway. But video games overall and the video game industry is becoming you know, one of the major media industries in the world, and a way that a lot of people are consuming narrative, and it's becoming more and more important. We're seeing people who were typically not part of the video game industry becoming part of it again. And Olivier, you mentioned creating content with atypical characters, and I was hoping that you could speak a little bit to what that means and why that's important for LowBirth, and how do you see that really impacting the industry overall?
I would say that for me it's there are many different levels, but for me one important thing is representation. Like I grew up in a small town in the early 2000s, and so my only exposure to queer people was through mainstream media. And back then, the representation wasn't very diverse. I mean, you know, like it would be mostly like the typical gay best friend character who probably likes to shop and is probably like a hairdresser or something. And there's nothing wrong with both of those things, but I hate shopping, and I've never cut anyone's hair, you know. So like I couldn't recognize myself in those representations, and so it was very hard for me at first to come to terms with my sexuality because of that. And so for me, when I decided to go into cinema first and now in video games, like representation is very important, and that's something that we try to do at LowBirth. And obviously we cannot represent everyone, that's impossible in a single game, and it's not our goal really, it's just to add to the representation that's already out there, add something new, and I don't think there can be too much representation.
No, that's amazing. I love that idea of including invisible minorities within the game creation, and how do you represent that? And Catherine, I would love to move the question to you as lead animator and animator for these games. Like, how do you create that reality for the player?
As an animator, I'm really trying to represent like Olivier's vision and everything, and I have an immense like trust into their vision. Olivier, Sai, Fatima, all the narrative team. As an animator, like I'm really bad at telling stories. I really like to tell other people's stories, even though I'm queer and I have a story and everything, but that's really not my place.
But I think don't like undersell yourself. I think like the way you animate the characters, you know, like it tells the story. It's a factor in telling the story.
Yeah, like my job is really trying to understand the character and how they move and how they portray themselves, but I don't really have a say in the narrative side of things. I could have a say if I wanted to, but I have so much I have so much respect for like what the other members of the team like are already telling that I'm just like trying to convey it.
Yeah,
if it makes
but you
sense.
bring this character to life. That's
Yeah.
something that's really key, right? You can write about a character, and probably writing about a character is much easier than bringing that character to life and seeing it move. And I think, and like once that character becomes live in a way and acting, you know, there's a personality that comes with it.
And like part of it is like staying true to the character also, like in the way they move. They are all different. Like we have a few key characters in our game, like Sophie, Beth, and Andrew, who all have like very distinct personalities, and they all move differently and talk differently. And we also like to look at the actors that do the voice actings. They also do like acting tests for them, and we like try to stay true to it. Of course, our characters are hand animated, so we are not using mocap. So, but we still try to get the realism of it and like get inspired by the actors and the narrative team.
Well, I think it comes back to what I was talking about earlier. It's really like the types of characters and stories that I'm interested in telling. I think that's really what it comes back to. But I would say in the end, I don't know like how really important my signature is, just in the sense that like movies and video games are very collaborative mediums. So like, sure, like I was, you know, at the inception of the project with Raphael and Chloe when we were just the two of us, but since then our team grew very much. And I think like every new person that works on the project brings so much to it. And I think the most important part of my job is actually not to create ideas or like come with like a signature. It's mostly about helping these great people and all the other people we worked with all work together and, you know, bring the best of themselves. And, you know, I kind of just like try to lead them because like they're all working in different departments and all that, different fields like animation, sound, music. Like, so I just try to bring everyone to create this great thing that is, you know, greater than the sum of its parts, you know. So.
Yeah. You have you know, your initial team was the visionary team, right? That created that vision behind the game, and then you know, it's important that always you stay true to that vision, but the creative process, different people work differently and bring different creative process, right? And you wanna, I mean, that's part of having that diversity on your team is to explore everyone's perspective, but then make sure that it stays true to the vision of the game that you're.
Yeah, I mean, the game evolved so much since the beginning. You know, like more than 3 years ago.
How do you create a space for the team to like have that personal input without also diversion from the vision of the story that you're trying to do?
That's a good question. I guess that comes back to my earlier point of like, that's I think the struggle of my job, that I want to give everyone a chance to contribute to the project, but at the same time, like, if there's not like a direction, it's going to be a real mess, you know. So it's kind of like inviting people's feedback, and like at the end of the day, sometimes I have to like make decisions of like, no, this doesn't work with the direction, but it's just, I don't know, it's just about being open and welcoming people's ideas.
Absolutely. So Catherine, I'm going to come back to you a little bit because you started working on this game and this bed we made, which we saw the video earlier, and it impacted you. So I want to talk a little bit about your journey being part of the game and also that impact it has on you designing it.
Working on this that we made, we're obviously telling queer stories and everything, but before working at LowBirth, I actually wasn't out of the closet. but learning about, not learning, but learning about those characters that doesn't really exist, but that we invented, that actually struggled through their secretive, like queer lives in the 50s, and just reflecting on that, our times in Montreal, and I'm still not out, and I can't imagine how it was for those people in the 50s. It must have been so hard, and also like feeling at ease with my coworkers that also are queer, most of them, and like feeling safe in a queer space, which is something I didn't have before. It gave me like the courage to come out to my family and friends. After so long, I'm 28 years old.
Sure. I mean, I think when you ask about the state of queerness and really any mainstream form of media, the answer is always like it could be better. I mean, we're slowly getting there. I think like it is something that's in terms of representation, it's definitely improving. In terms of the people behind the games, I think it's definitely improving. But I think like there's a long way to go, and I know that's like. Yeah, it feels a little like defeating to kind of say that. It's like, will we ever be done? Will there ever be enough? And like Olivier said, like there's never too much of it. But we still have a long way to go before it's something that I think is like widely accepted, widely celebrated. I mean, it's still hard for game devs with very, very popular games to announce a queer character being added to the roster or something like that without massive backlash. Or it's still very hard for games that are predominantly about minorities kind of at the front and center to be really celebrated, to be really like to achieve that same level of commercial success as games that really center like straight white men who have bad haircuts and stuff. Like it's a little dire out there for us, but I think they all have the same haircut, yeah. But I think like perceptions of who plays video games are slowly shifting. I think like that's really a big part of our mission as well at LowBirth Games is to really, really try and put the spotlight on, hand the controller over to people who don't necessarily identify as like gamers, quote unquote. And I think like that definitely includes sexuality, it includes gender identity, it also can include something, as simple as you're not a person who has ever played a video game before. And I think, there's really something great about working at a place that not only fosters that in the games that we make, but also just like in our hiring practices and who's making the games. I think like, again, you kind of spoke about how like it's hard to find an in into the video game field if you haven't like specifically tailored your academic career towards that. And so much of that was just being so lucky to apply to a place that was actually interested in taking somebody who's a little bit outside of the standard and somebody who's bringing a different perspective.
Yeah.
And so I think it really kind of comes down to studios being willing to be more open, willing to embrace different perspectives, and that's something that is gonna make a difference as time goes on. Yeah.